and welcome everybody. I'll be calling the Monday, April 22nd, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. Tonight's meeting is being held in person and virtually on Zoom. I will be leading the meeting and the public will be welcome to participate when invited. You're welcome to attend the meeting in person or join via online Zoom, or you can phone in as well. Additional instructions on how to participate are posted online, www.burnsvillemn.gov, and it's located in the public meeting calendar. As usual, tonight's meeting is available for viewing on BC TV and on the city's website. If you're unable to participate this evening and you'd like to submit public testimony, I encourage you to email your comments to city staff or mail your comments directly here to City Hall. So the instructions for participating online tonight are by going to zoom.us/join and typing in the meeting ID, which is 867-2135-3885. Once you're logged into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator which item you would like to speak to. You can also phone in to attend the meeting. The telephone number is 651-372-8299. Same meeting ID, which is 867-2135-3885. We'll have a few public hearings for each one. I'll open up a time when the callers may speak to the item, and we'll give you more instructions at that time. Your call will be muted until it's your time to speak, and there may be a slight delay due to the differences in technology. With that, the first item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes.
Are there any changes to the agenda from commissioners? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as it was published.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as published.
Commissioner John, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by everybody. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Item number 2 is the approval of our minutes from our April 8th meeting. Any changes to the meetings from staff?
No.
Any changes to the meeting from commissioners? Again, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved.
Approve.
And a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We're on to item number 3, which is a public hearing. This is the application of CSM Park Place LP for a planned unit development amendment to add a second drive-through lane and construct a new canopy structure on the Chick-fil-A Restaurant located at 1200 County Road 42 West. Presenting will be Mr. Kevin Shea, planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So tonight you do have the planning unit development amendment for the second drive-through lane and constructing a new canopy structure at 1200 County Road 42 West. This was continued from the April 8th meeting. So the site is a 1.12 acre site. It is part of the Burnsville Plaza parcel area. Chick-fil-A was approved as part of the 2014 PUD amendment at that time. And the subsequent approval was in 2020. The zoning and land use were changed from B3 to general mix and general business to mix and mixed use, and that was in consistency with the comprehensive plan. So land use and zoning for it, as I mentioned, it's zoned mix PUD. So it does have a planned unit development on top of the mix land use and zoning. So it's a guided mixed use in the 2040 plan. It is surrounded on all sides except for the very north corner, which goes to R3A, but every other direction is that same mixed use zoning and land use. Moving into the site plan, I'll kind of run through some of the changes happening on here. There's a lot going on in the confined space. So everything marked on here in the darker gray is changes or either removals or additions. The white is kind of what is to remain. In between for the drive-through. So currently there are 2 lanes at the menu board area, the ordering area, and then it skinnies up to a single lane, which then runs through the remainder of the drive-through alongside the 2 pickup area, pay and pickup. The proposal is to modify that layout so that the 2 lanes would then continue through from the menu board area all the way through the site until it skinnies up to 1 lane at the very north side of the building, where it would exit onto out of the drive-through and into the regular traffic flow. So with that, there is a PUD amendment required. There's 2 deviations. I'll kind of denote them on here, so it's easy to see on imagery. First, the second drive-through lane, where it is dark gray, is essentially all the additions that happen to install that second drive-through lane. There's a 10-foot setback required for drive-through lanes for this kind of operation. This this drive-through lane is 5.7 feet from the edge of curb to the property line. Some of the easement you'll see in between is there's a 5-foot sidewalk easement that exists 5 feet outside of the right-of-way. So the sidewalk easement to the edge of the pavement for the drive-through would be 0.7 feet. So that's some of the dimensions there. The other encroachment or the other deviation would be, because they're doing a canopy structure extended from the principal structure of the main building, it is considered an extension of the principal structure. The principal structure has a 30-foot required setback. With the overhang and the post or the footings for that structure, they're at 5 feet setback from the property line. It's essentially right on the back edge of the sidewalk easement is where the overhang at the closest point. So all of this I'm talking about is kind of at the south edge of the canopy structure and that turn for the drive-through lane. And then as the property doesn't move straight north, it moves a little bit straight north and east, the deviations get smaller. So these are at the pinch point or the tightest point, and then the deviations get smaller and eventually go away in terms of the drive-through. The canopy does, for almost the entirety, not meet the setback requirement. In terms of landscaping on here, they are proposing to add some landscaping in 3 concentrated areas, I'll call them. One is the landscape area that runs along the menu board order point on the west side. One other area is the southeast corner, as it's adjacent to the intersection and on just past the order points or the menu boards. And then the northeast corner, which would be kind of is the most impacted, I guess, because that's where the area is that it's not meeting the setback. And so they have landscaping there. And then on the landscape plan, it doesn't show up great on here, but there is a 4-foot high privacy fence that wraps the corner as it turns from east to north. So that is a 4-foot fence along there, and that extends essentially on the plan from one landscaped section to the other, from the one in the southeast corner to the one on the northeast corner. So I'll run through some of the engineering considerations with this. So there is a 10-foot public DNU easement and a 5-foot sidewalk easement along that east property line. The proposed 4-foot fence, the southeast corner of the canopy structure, and the southeast footing for that structure, and the drive-through pavement all encroach into the DNU easement. None of them encroach into the sidewalk easement, but they do in the DNU easement. So if this were to move forward, we'd need encroachment agreements for each of those factors encroaching into the DNU easement, and where it conflicts with private utilities, whether it's telephone, cable, electric, they would need to coordinate the relocation of those private utilities. So the fence, some considerations besides that is that the fence is less than a foot from the edge of the sidewalk, which does have an impact on the snow plowing operations within there, the snow removal from that sidewalk. The grading plan does have fill over the sidewalk and grading within the easement. That's being adjusted, I believe, but we don't have a plan that shows it, or the plan in the packet did not show it. And then proposed encroachments do conflict with the public interest and negatively impact the city's ability to maintain that sidewalk. Typically, and I'll speak for Logan Blassie, the city engineer in this case, 2 feet is needed to maintain on the edge of the sidewalk for snow plow removal, essentially, from the operations of removing a 5-foot sidewalk. You need at least 2 feet behind the curb or behind the edge of the sidewalk to allow for storage in that area. I believe it is the applicant's intent to meet that. It just wasn't shown on the plan with the dimensions that way. There is a note that does indicate that they intend to put a 2-foot separation, but it's not shown that way on the sidewalk, or on the plans. So I just mentioned that. And then as far as the planning considerations, so the proposed plan, as I mentioned, has 2 deviations from zoning ordinance standards. The drive-through setback, where it's required to be 10 feet, they're at 5.7. These are all measured from the right-of-way line, not the sidewalk easement. So there's kind of 2 things in play, because that sidewalk easement is behind the property line. So these are all measured from the property line and not from the sidewalk easement. The principal structure setback is 30 feet and they're at 5. So these deviations do place the drive-through and canopy structure within the existing D&U easement with less than a foot of separation from the sidewalk as it's depicted, not as it's noted in the plans. And then the proposal includes a 4-foot tall privacy fence and an additional 163 shrubs to be added. So the privacy fence, to meet ordinance standards for screening of a drive-through, would need to be 6 feet tall to meet those screening requirements. So as it's shown, it's 4 feet, it would need to be 6 feet if that's the method that they want to use to screen it. And then shrubs are above the ordinance requirements for landscape. So all of those are essentially additional shrubs above what's required under ordinance. So from a planning perspective, there are significant departures requested as part of the PUD amendment application, with negative impacts in terms of use, maintenance, and diminished screening buffer for that drive-through. And the only identifiable benefit that staff had was the additional shrubs that are being planted. So with that, staff felt that there was not an adequate benefit to this PUD request given the significance of some of the PUD deviations and the impact on the public for the use. So staff is not supportive of the PUD amendment request. So with that, the recommendation from staff is that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council denial of the PUD amendment to expand a single lane drive-through to two drive-through lanes and construct a new canopy structure at the Chick-fil-A at 1200 County Road 42 West. So with that, I'll stand for any questions for staff. The applicant is here and we'll be able to speak when you have questions for them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. Excellent presentation. First question is easement encroachment. So like the drainage and utility easement is there for drainage and utilities. So if a utility company wanted to, and we're proposing to have part of the building in that easement, right, which is the support for the canopy. And if the utilities needed somehow to access something, they have because it's an easement, they have the right to access that. So if they gotta get a bulldozer in there and the post from the building is encroaching on that, they have, they can get in there with whatever kind of equipment they want. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. With the drainage and utility
Okay.
easement, the utility companies have the right to access that space. That's part of I'm not the attorney that would deal with the encroachment agreement and knowing
yeah,
all the terms
okay.
and legal
Yeah.
responsibilities within that. But generally, within a DNU easement, they have the right to utilize that easement for their utility purposes.
Right.
So if one of their lines were impacted by some type of failure, or it needed replacement, or something like that, or they were upgrading the line and just wanted to replace the entire section, they would have the legal right to go in and remove the ground and anything on the ground. So that could be the pavement or the pole or whatever it is, to replace that line.
Okay,
Which is why there'd be a condition to relocate those lines, so hopefully none of the lines would need to be underneath any of those features. Because there would be hopefully, and this is where I mentioned the discrepancy on the plans, that there would be a 2-foot separation between the sidewalk and the fence or the closest impact in the DNU easement, so that there would be at least a 2-foot space that potentially utility companies could locate within there. It's tight,
yeah,
but we wouldn't want it, worst case scenario, you'd have to take out the entire corner of the canopy.
right.
If something were to happen, we'd want to avoid that.
And that's
for
what
everybody
that's
involved.
what the encroachment agreement, you have to have an encroachment agreement with any utility that is there or any utility that has, how does that work?
So it's essentially an encroachment agreement would be spelled out what the encroachments are within the agreement. So in this case, that's why I mentioned them kind of specifically, is because there's essentially 4, because you have, I guess 3. The curb and pavement for the drive-through itself, then you have the fence, and then you also have the canopy structure with the support post. So those are kind of the 3, I guess, because the drive-through is all one, I guess, instead of just curb and pavement, but those are both within there. It would spell out what those encroachments are, why they're allowed or how they're allowed, and then it would go into like who's responsible for what in terms of when things happen.
So it's not an agreement with the utilities, it's specifically like with the power company or the,
They would be involved because they're part of, if they have utilities within that area, they would get notified.
yeah,
Be
so would
involved
they,
with that.
is there an agreement that has to happen between the applicant and the utility? Or is that just something that we as this, that the city kind of mediates and says, okay?
A little bit because of the nature of a drainage and utility easement, but in this case, it's more, we're including a condition to make sure it happens because
Yeah.
there are times when, because it would be between the utility company and this private entity, we would not be involved in every conversation, so we need to have proof at the end that everybody's okay and that things have been done correctly.
Okay.
So those are conversations we haven't had the fine details on at this point.
Okay, thank you for helping me through that. Any questions from other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
You had said at the exit of the drive-through that there's enough room to have 2 lanes there, I believe. Is it possible that you could, like some drive-throughs do, have 1 lane and then there's maybe 2 windows and the cars could go into that 2nd lane in an area where it doesn't encroach?
You mean as it moves further north, essentially? So, let's see if I can get my.
Well, let's say instead of the canopy, you would have 2 drive-through windows. And they would serve whoever is at that window. If the one behind gets done first, is there enough room for that one to have a 2nd lane to go around?
Yeah,
by the
I
exit?
don't know, because I'm not sure how much space you need essentially for a bypass lane. So if the rear window picked up first and the front window was still stuck and they had to pull around, I don't know that that would work, because I haven't seen a drawing that depicts that, so I don't know if that would still encroach into the setback based on the placement of the drive-through windows.
But at some points along near the exit, there is room to do it without encroachment.
Yeah, about
Yeah, can you identify it on the plan there?
essentially just north of the 2nd canopy post on, so if you're looking at the canopy post, which are the circles on the right-hand side of the drive-through, just north of that is where it starts to comply with the setback requirement
Okay.
for the drive-through, not for the canopy.
Can you kind of drag the mouse over the area that does not comply, just so we can understand?
Yeah, it's essentially like, you can see this dash line
Yep,
running along here. As soon as the dash line moves outside of what is the edge of the curb line right here, it's starting to meet the setback. So everything south of here, all the way down to right here where it crosses,
okay.
is the encroachment or the pieces that don't meet the required setback.
Okay. Questions from other commissioners? Any other questions? Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you. The question I have is about the queuing. Do you know, or can you explain where the queuing problem is? I'm fairly familiar with the property in the area, but I'm curious what problem this is alleviating.
I would think that'd probably be best for the applicant, because I don't want to speak to their business operations and why they're moving forward with this. From a staff standpoint, there's adequate stacking for a single or a double in terms of meeting code requirements. So that would be probably best answered by the applicant.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner John?
So, just to clarify, you were talking about the sidewalk easement and the actual property easement. The sidewalk easement is within the property lines, right? Because the property goes to the curb? Is that
Correct. So the right of way, the sidewalk easement is outside of the right of way, so it's technically on this property.
Okay.
5 feet in on this property, all
5
the way
feet
along
from
that.
the property line, which is the curb?
Yep.
Right, okay, that's what I was thinking. I appreciate that.
And that's common, every lot has a,
It's done both. Sometimes
5
the
foot.
sidewalks are located in the right of way, sometimes they're located just outside the right of way and in a sidewalk easement, so it's done both ways.
and every property has a drainage and utility easement of
Yeah,
about
that's
5
standard
feet
practice.
5 feet around the whole perimeter.
Standard
yeah.
is 10 feet on front property lines and 5 feet on side and rear for
Okay.
drainage and utility easements. Yep.
Commissioner Anderson?
Regarding the fence, if it goes to 6 feet, is it close enough to the roads where they have it planned that it could block visibility?
It's currently not in the site triangle, so the 30-foot site triangle on the corner
Okay.
to make sure that you have clear visibility of an intersection. It does not come into that, or it's not affecting that visibility.
Okay.
Go ahead. Commissioner
Snow
Hamilton.
removal on both from the sidewalk perspective and the Chick-fil-A property. If they're removing snow from that drive lane, does that impact the sidewalk?
It's it's very tight right there, so there's possibilities it could. They have to do snow removal on theirs as well to allow people, to access their drive-through. I haven't seen a snow removal plan to know what their plan would be for this. Ideally that would be somewhere where they could push it to areas where they have excess space and not need to utilize the smaller space that is on the would be between the sidewalk and the drive-through. But it is an area of concern from staff.
So the second drive up is still attached to the primary building, it's just farther up the line, correct?
In terms of, are you talking about the windows now?
Yeah.
On the building? Yeah, I mean, there's two windows, as I understand it, on the building itself. Those are to remain. So the way this would function essentially is having, instead of having, you have the two menu board signs where you order. Currently, once you order at the menu board, it skinnies up to one lane, and then you use that one lane to access through and access the two windows. This would allow them to have two drive-through lanes. The second drive-through lane would be serviced, that's the reasoning for the two crosswalks on the plan, is that someone would then exit the building across to service that person that's in the farther away drive-through lane, at both of those points, potentially, depending on staffing and who they have and, peak times and.
Commissioner Anderson.
Are there really two drive-throughs on the building right now? Two windows, I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure we can let the applicant confirm that, but I believe that's how it operates currently.
Because when I was driving by, I didn't see a second one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'm mistaken. I can let them confirm.
Maybe we'll have the applicant talk in the public hearing portion of this. So does anyone else have questions for Mr. Shea? Okay, thank you. We'll move to the public hearing portion of the meeting. So I will open this up for a public hearing here at 6:51. And if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this matter, you're welcome to step up to the podium and do so. Applicant is welcome to do that now. Or if anyone else wants to speak. But yeah, this would be a great time for the applicant to come and speak to the item. And if you can state your name and your address for the record.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric Wilkinsgaard. I'm with Kimley Horn and Associates. We're the consulting civil engineering firm. Address 14800 Galaxy Avenue, Apple Valley, Minnesota. With me, I've got Andrew from from Chick-fil-A, the store operator, and then Kayla from the ownership group, JLL. Kevin did a great job highlighting kind of the overall plan and some of the concerns that staff had. Wanted to give just a little bit of context to Commissioner Timmerman's comment there about maybe the reason for this or why we're doing this. So as part of a national program, Chick-fil-A has been looking at their drive-thrus and trying to make things a little bit more efficient. And one of the outcomes of that analysis has been to add a second drive-through lane for mobile order pickups. I'll let Andrew talk a little bit more about the operations of that. But one thing that this does really make more efficient on this site specifically is the on-site traffic flow and operations. And so it's not shown on the screen here, but as the site works further to the west towards Starbucks during peak times, right, like probably about right now, the vehicles end up stacking back a little bit and impacting some of Starbucks operations and some of the traffic flow of the entire, not only Chick-fil-A, but Starbucks and the shopping center property. So that's kind of the overall reason for why we're proposing this. We understand that it does get pretty tight and there are some concerns regarding snow removal and whatnot. So I'll let Andrew take over and discuss a little bit more about the operations and snow removal.
Sure, yeah, there was first of all, thank you for having us, by the way. It's a pleasure to be here. There were some questions just raised about the reason for this. Is there a capacity issue? Why would we want to move forward with this? Oftentimes when you see, if you're familiar with my drive-thru, oftentimes when you see that lines start to bleed back, towards Starbucks and into the shopping center area, it is because there's a backup at the drive-thru window. Now, this is not true 100% of the time, but sometimes you have a difficult customer that's there, or that can be just a challenging place. And so, to try to alleviate that, if we can have a second drive-through lane, we'll actually have team members outside. We have 2 ordering points, if that will allow. We have then the 2 lanes for our cars to pull around to the meal fulfillment area. We would actually be able to double our throughput at the drive-through window area, and so that's the hope. that it will not then back up traffic, even back near our neighbors.
Mr. Johnson, could you state your name and address for the record? I forgot to
Yes.
get that from you. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Andrew Johnson, 1200 County Road 42 West, Burnsville, Minnesota,
Thank you.
of course.
Will you, can we ask you some questions?
Yeah, please.
Okay. First of all, I just want to state that I really enjoyed doing research for this item, so appreciate that.
What does that mean?
It's my pleasure.
Yes. First question is, so there's another Chick-fil-A at Apple Valley. Have they already had this, and they have a canopy over their meal fulfillment area? Is that kind of the example of what you're trying to achieve here?
So to my knowledge, they have a canopy over their order taking area, which we don't have. I don't believe that they have a canopy over, do you know, Kayla?
They will very soon.
Okay.
They will have a canopy over their meal fulfillment area, yes.
Okay, so they don't have an example of what you're trying to get?
Not yet, not yet. There are some in the Twin Cities that do.
Okay. Commissioner, open it up to other commissioners. Commissioner John?
Yeah, obviously, the city is not very keen on having this occur.
Yeah.
What would be your plans if we were to say, no, this is not gonna work out?
Would you like to speak to that?
Sure, yeah. We've talked a little bit internally about some additional things that may or may not work. We're still trying to work through those from an engineering operations standpoint. So while there potentially might be some options, this is the one that we thought was best suited for the issue that we're seeing.
I would tell you from an operational standpoint, we've gotten ourselves to a point where we can do 200 cars through a drive-through in a single hour. So we built some significant efficiencies in the business. We can improve that still, but there is a limit to that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Would the second window be open the whole time or only during your busy period, your lunch and dinner run?
Yeah, good question. So to clarify, we only have one drive-through window
Right.
on the building. The second lane would be, it would be open throughout the entirety of the day.
But you aren't adding a drive-through window?
We're not adding a window, no. The proposal is to add a second lane for our cars. The idea would actually to have team members outside delivering meals to the cars that are in the second lane.
Commissioner Timmerman, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The question I have, I'm just looking at an aerial of the Apple Valley location, and you might not be able to answer these questions, but the property looks very similar. So I'm curious if you guys are involved with the Apple Valley, do you know, have they talked about these same drainage and utility concerns and the setbacks? Because I'm just looking at it, it almost looks identical, just pivoted.
Do I need to state my name?
Yes, please. Name and address, please.
I'm Kayla Fortner. Sorry, I don't know my work address. Let me see here. Well, okay. 3115 Dogwood Drive, Atlanta, Georgia, 30354. So Apple Valley, we were not involved with the canopy like Andrew mentioned that for the order taking area. We are currently in process of adding a canopy over the mill fulfillment area. So we have not run into the same sort of issues. We've run into separate issues, utilities and such, and we're working through those with those providers. But very similar process. We've done several canopies throughout the Twin Cities area as well.
Okay. And you may have, excuse me, you may have said this, but is that Chick-fil-A going to get a second lane as well?
That one is not. It's, physically not possible, due to some site
Even
constraints.
tighter there?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners for the applicant? This is still a public hearing, and I should have said this is a continuation of the public hearing that we opened at our last meeting. So just for the record, to be clear about that. Commissioner Anderson.
Is it feasible with the building the way you have it to add a second window? I
can speak to that. The way that the kitchen and the the meal delivery area is set up, it is not feasible. The second window would actually be where the dining room is currently.
So there's a couple references to things that are being proposed that are not on the drawings. Is that,
Yeah, I can speak to yep, so there's a conflicting note, the note on sheet C200, which is just off the screen here, says contractor to ensure a minimum of 24 inches between the sidewalk and the face of the curb, which is the requirement, from Public Works. Our plans currently show, just under a foot. We have flexibility to make that 2 feet, almost exactly, from the fence to the sidewalk.
but that, it doesn't show up that way on the drawings.
As the drawings are currently shown, it shows 0.9 feet.
Okay. I'm struggling with even, considering something that, we're looking at something that isn't really what's being proposed, and so I'm struggling with that a little bit. Commissioner John, another question for the applicant.
So one of my biggest fears when I was looking at this, I scrolled all the way down to the bottom right away, so I get a vision of the site, and the approach to the sidewalk it looks like a safety issue to me. You have cars coming in within 2 feet of somebody on the other side of the sidewalk, has absolutely no idea that there's a car there. Accidents happen. Is there any fear there? You've dealt with other sites that would have some type of issue like that?
So the fence is going to be buffering between the drive-through and the sidewalk. Along with the fence, there's a full 6-inch high curb too. So at the low speeds of the drive-through traffic, in the engineering judgment, a vehicle it would be very unlikely for a vehicle to hop the curb in that location, traveling at such a low speed with a 6-inch high curb. At the same time, a pedestrian is walking by with the fence visual aid right there as well. So we would not anticipate safety concerns between pedestrians on the sidewalk and vehicles in the drive-through.
Question. With the
Commissioner Hamilton.
With the addition of the fence, does that create a visual hazard to cars on Burnhaven, either looking to go straight or turning, where it's now somewhat of a blind intersection?
It is not impacted in the site visibility triangle for the site itself. So we have a standard that the city staff uses to establish cleared site triangles for intersections. The fence does not impact that. It is outside of that site triangle for Burnhaven and the County Road 42 intersection.
So this is a public hearing. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak to this issue? Is there anybody on Zoom that would like to speak to this issue? I'm going to close the public hearing, and then we'll close the public, thank you, by the way, appreciate it. We'll close the public hearing at 7:03, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner John.
So going back to staff, you do not recommend us moving this forward to the city council. Is the biggest concerns having to deal with easement, the drain utility easement in the placement of the posts of the canopy? Is it the distance between, if they're able to move the sidewalk or from the sidewalk enough to where snow can come, be plowed out? What is the biggest concern that staff has?
I think to kind of summarize from staff's perspective, it's just the number of concerns.
Okay.
And the variety. So there's quite a few in there, alongside the fact that these deviations, there's, one of them is quite large, going from 30 to 5, and then the other one from 10 to 5.9 or 5.7 is, there's 2 pretty big deviations there with, in staff's determination, a lack of benefit. I mean, the added benefit, or the only identifiable area where we're going above ordinance standards and providing something that that's typically the factor we use for a PUD, or that is what we use for every planned unit development that comes through. The only addition was the shrubs. So we're trying to find some type of other benefit that would then outweigh or equalize the scales, I guess, in terms of the deviations. So those compounding factors altogether is kind of why staff came up with the recommendation for denial.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty, I mean, that's, you did a very nice job outlining that in the report. And the other thing that's very clear in the report is that the applicants were advised from the get-go that this was that staff wouldn't support it. It's very unlikely that staff would be able to support it. And so I just want to make that clear, that's stated pretty clearly in the report. Go ahead, Commissioner Hamilton.
Are there things that Chick-fil-A could do that would satisfy staff's concerns?
Potentially. So we tried to work with them. So I'll preface this by saying I didn't start the conversations with Chick-fil-A. The former city planner, Sarah Madden, had the initial conversations, and I continued along with it. We did have conversations with Chick-fil-A and with Kimley Horn on some ways to potentially gain staff support, you know, limiting the encroachments to the degree possible, or having smaller deviations where maybe the canopy didn't extend quite so far out, things like that, to essentially reduce the deviations and then provide some other PUD benefit as part of that. I leave the door open for that because I like when people get creative and find ways to do what is most cost effective for them and also can meet those. But that was not part of the plan that they have brought forward tonight. So there potentially could be a way. I can't speak to what that would be exactly because it kind of a conversation that needs to or a compromise, I guess, between both parties. But staff had to evaluate the application that was submitted, so.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of share my feeling about this. I mean, it's a huge ask, what they're asking for, and we're looking at incomplete drawings or drawings that don't describe really what is being proposed. It would be helpful to have a better visualization of what this is, and, you know, whether it's some sort of rendered image or 3D image, which is pretty, would be pretty easy to accomplish, but it also may show that it's kind of, it would give us a better sense of what's being proposed. So, and for that reason, I'm going to oppose this. Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, I would, when you talk about deviations, the things I look at, if you remove the canopy and created some sort of a safety mechanism like speed bumps or something like that where the cars round that corner, I'd be more likely to vote for it. But the way I look at it, I too don't see it as a viable alternative. If you're going to bring food out to people, you could have them drive around to the other side, where there's a door, and have them park and bring their food out there as a way to speed the service.
I would Commissioner John.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with what the Chair had stated, that it would be nice to be able to work with the applicant, make this work. I just don't see it happening. I do have safety concerns with it, even if they're at slow speeds. Either way, cars coming in. I wish that we could make it work for you. I just don't see it happening, and I will have to vote against it as well.
I would love to entertain a motion, unless there are additional comments or questions. Commissioner Hamilton, did you have a?
Yeah, I would like to see this happen, but the indication is there's some areas that are incomplete. I'd like to see a better drawing or image of what this actually looks like, or some creative ideas. And that if Chick-fil-A would be willing to come back with something a little bit more concrete and fill in some of those gaps and holes, that we have, a 6-foot fence and you have a 4-foot fence, or to address some of these other concerns. If there is a workaround, then I'd be more apt to vote yes for it. But there's too many unknowns at this point.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Hamilton said what I was thinking, and that is, the Chick-fil-A's been a great partner for Burnsville. Absolutely shows up, and I think this plan, if it doesn't go through here, I think that there may be opportunities for, you know, taking another look at this, maybe coming at it from a different angle. I think, you know, I would wholeheartedly support another effort at this. But as the other commissioners stated, I think it's a big ask for this particular variance, so I'm in agreement with the no tonight.
Commissioner Anderson, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I would.
Is that a hint? That sounded like a hint.
I move that we recommend to the city council to deny this application.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor of denying the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. So we're on to our next item. Let me get to my paperwork here. This is the application, or this is a hearing application of Carciofini Company for a variance to allow the parking lot to encroach into a 15-foot north side yard setback located at 14380 Burnsville Parkway West. Also presenting Mr. Kevin Shea, City Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, the next item before you is the variance for the 2-foot parking lot setback of 13 feet versus 15 feet from the side yard setback from the north property line for 14380 Burnsville Parkway West. So side by side for this one to show where the property is, you can see the existing structure, parking orientation. It is zoned I3, Office and Industrial Park, existing building from about 1994. They're proposing some site modifications with this. So existing conditions and removals, I'm going to concentrate your focus on the northeast corner of this drawing. The area of the variance, the 2-foot north side yard variance, is essentially starts just on the eastern edge of the building, essentially, and as it moves, there are removals right here, turn and come down. That's the area where they're essentially removing and replacing to modify the alignment there for some turning truck movements for the industrial use of that property. And then modifying the interior of that same area on that same corner. They're going to have some modifications there for turning movements. And with that, there's the one tree that gets removed as part of that, which is, as I'll get to it, one of the conditions as part of this. This may have been the easier drawing actually to look at that. So we have the 2-foot side yard, 2-foot encroachment of the 15-foot setback. It's highlighted in the teal or the light blue here. So it's a pretty small deviation from the required setback, and it is essentially what exists today. So they are not modifying that, most of that northern portion except for where you can see the removal here. But triggering, some of the removals trigger the need for a variance here, but it was constructed that way back in 1994. I'll kind of skip over the development summary chart. They do meet all the requirements through there. This is their proposed site plan, so you can see on here what it does do is this curb line, as it's on the north side, does extend a little further forward, still meeting the 20-foot front yard parking setback, but the encroachment of that 13 feet versus 15 feet does extend further. So as part of that, they're requesting that variance for that, and that's to allow a wider turning radius for the vehicles that frequently utilize the site. So with that, same thing, the grading plan is very minor in terms of what's changing on site, because the changes on site are very minor as well. So with that, staff does recommend, the planning commission recommended the city council approval of the 2-foot north side yard variance to allow a 13-foot setback instead of a 15-foot ordinance standard, subject to the conditions. And there is one modification on there. There's the condition for the minimum one tree to be replaced that was being removed. There was a right-of-way permit shall be obtained for the, as part of the application. They've already pulled that permit now, so they no longer need that condition. And if as you may have noticed, if you did visit the site at all, they are doing some site work, but it is not associated with the variance application. They've already begun their other site work, but as part of that right-of-way permit. So that's everything staff has. If you have any questions for staff.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Shea. Part of the normal process is to notify neighbors within 350 feet of the property line. Is that correct in this? So that
I think it's 500 300 or is it 350?
So yes, it is normally 350 feet for most applications, being that this is a variance application only. That does change the requirement for notification to just be the adjacent properties instead of the 350 feet. So that's kind of the difference between the public hearing versus the hearing.
Okay. Oh, and this is just a hearing, not a public hearing.
Correct. You still can allow
You're right.
anybody to speak here, but it's basically based on the notifications that we provide.
Excellent. And that's kind of where I was going. This really only affects the one neighbor, and even so minimally. And has there been any comment or concern from the one neighbor?
No, we haven't heard
Okay, just to
anything.
get that out in the open up front. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
This is really only for like a driveway. There's no parking on that north side at all.
Correct, yep. Yeah, there's no parking anywhere along that north curb line.
Was the setback correct when they built the building, or was it?
It
Put
appears
in
that it
error.
was built slightly in error, 2 feet in error specifically, from what it was supposed to be done back in 1994.
It's a coincidental amount.
I think it had to do with the fact that the curb line tends to run parallel, essentially straight east-west, and the property line does not. And so as
yeah.
things moved further eastward, the setback came into play more.
I see.
Commissioner John, did you have a question?
I did, Mr. Shea. When we look at, so they're planning to expand that area there, are they going to close in the other side, or is the driveway going to be just that much wider?
The driveway essentially becomes just a little bit wider on the entirety of it, because they do expand that curb line essentially further east to get a little more turning on that side, and then also where the tree removal happens on the northeast corner of the building, that curb line there gets modified and becomes a little less tight. There's a little more width just throughout that whole turning section.
Okay, that makes sense.
Commissioner Timmerman?
I'd like to make a motion if we can entertain that.
I would be happy to entertain your motion.
I would like to move to approve as staff have presented.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hamilton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. So this, just to clarify, this will be presented on the city council consent agenda. Do you know which city council, what the date of that city council meeting will be?
I believe, let me check here.
Just for the public record.
I believe that would go on the May 21st. Does that sound right, Kevin?
I believe so.
Okay, well, and that information will be public on the website.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're on to our next item, item number 5. This is a public hearing. I didn't close that last one out too fast. Right? That just because it was a hearing, that's all we needed to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so this next one is a public hearing, a little bit more in depth. This is the application of Element Indoor Golf LLC for a planned unit development amendment for a lounge use for an indoor golf facility with full-service bar and kitchen in the Burnside Plaza Shopping Center at 14314 Burnhaven Drive. Also presenting Mr. Shea, our city planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So before you, there is a planned unit development amendment for a lounge use for the indoor golf facility with bar and restaurant at 14314 Burnhaven Drive. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with this site. So it's on the corner of 143rd and Burnhaven Drive, the Burnside Plaza. It is zoned mixed use, guided the same. East, west, and north are all the same land use and zoning as well. To the south is the R3A medium density residential zoning and guidance. They are proposing to occupy, I'll stay on the aerial for a little bit, this essentially where the building jogs and forms the north half of a Y. On that corner is essentially the location the tenant is proposing to utilize for the Element Golf, or the indoor golf facility. So with that, this is the proposed floor plan and layout, so you'll notice, I'm just gonna run through this so you get a sense of what they're proposing to do for operations. They have 12 golf simulator bays with a lounge area, multiple tables, and then a bar with a full-service kitchen as well. And then they do have private bays that you can utilize as well. So that's what they're proposing to do on the interior. That is classified as a lounge use under the code. And with that, there's only one condition for a lounge use as a CUP within this zoning district. There's only one condition on it, and it's that it has to be 100 feet from the adjacent residential zoning district. In this case, the existing Burnside Plaza building is located 37 feet if you're measuring from the back of the building, essentially not the customer-facing side, but the back of the building for loading, unloading, things like that, from the adjacent residential district. And so with that, they need a PUD amendment to essentially deviate from that to be 37 feet is the existing building as part of that. So, short slideshow because there's not really much else going on. It's just the interior renovations that would require a building permit. So with that, staff does recommend that the planning commission recommend to the city council approval of the PUD amendment to allow a lounge in the mixed-use zoning district at 14314 Burnhaven Drive with the following condition is that they will include, this is a requirement from the code, the odor-reducing equipment as part of the building permit, which minimizes food odors emitted outside the building, and that is a requirement for all food operations when located adjacent to residential districts.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. My first question is this coming before us only because of the deviation? Like if there's no deviation, if this would just go through the normal approval process and not require a public hearing? Okay.
Yep.
And then I'm going to ask a kind of a weird nitpicky question. Is that 37 feet, is that the distance from the back of the building to the property line, or is it from the back of the building to the closest residential structure? What's the 37
Good
feet?
distinction. 37 feet is from the property line to the back of the building, not to the closest adjacent structure, because the language is for the zoning district boundary, which is the edge of the property line, not the actual townhome unit, which is an additional, I didn't measure it, but 25, 30 feet at least off that property line. And there is, if you're familiar with the area, significant vegetative growth on the backside between the closest residential unit, which I know these are a little smaller images, but which would be this half of the duplex here.
So the distance from the back of the building to the red line is 37 feet.
Correct.
Excellent. This seems pretty straightforward. Any questions? Commissioner John?
Yeah, why would I have a question? That's weird. I'm assuming that the restriction is based on alcohol use, being too close to families, smells, things of that nature, so.
Yeah, it's typically intended for more of a standalone structure that's not part of a larger structure where you have such a buffer from it being on the interior of a mall, and it's, the entrance is, the primary entrance for the commercial traffic customers would be on the opposite side from where the, essentially
Where the street
code
traffic.
requirement is, yeah.
Right.
So I think in this case, it's just a, where a code requirement applies from the code perspective, but may not apply in practice.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Anderson?
Where the food prep area and the bathrooms are, is about the same area as driving, or the room 11 and 10. Any chance we could get them to move that up there and exhaust it out toward the parking lot rather than exhausting back towards the residential?
I think it kind of depends. I didn't look at, that's a great suggestion. I didn't look at the floor plan to see if that would be a possibility. It'd be something we'd have to work through on their building permit to see if there was an alternative location. My inclination is that given where the existing utilities are for the area, they probably pick the most efficient location for the kitchen. But it's certainly something we could bring up from a staff perspective.
And food orders aren't necessarily a concern, that's just a standard, as you said, a standard.
Yeah, I mean, the
requirement.
When there's a restaurant business located to a residential district, there's a requirement that they install the odor reducing equipment that goes on the hoods of the kitchen equipment to essentially reduce the odors that come out from kitchens. That's a requirement regardless. Would and is a requirement regardless.
Even if they met the setback, it would be a requirement.
Correct. Yeah, like even if the kitchen equipment was located outside of the 100, I don't even know if you could get outside the 100 feet by moving into the north side of the building. But even if they did, the entire structure and the ventilation and the units the kitchen is gonna come out regardless. The smells and the odors and things would still come out as part of the structure as the whole. We just treat the whole structure as one requirement for that.
I
So
was
the
just thinking
building
of-
is, yeah.
if you could move it, at least you're venting and, out the front instead of the back.
Commissioner Timmerman, did you have a question?
Yes, I was just going to comment that without the lounge use, though, that would be a moot point, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff before we open up our public hearing? Seeing none, we will open the public hearing at 7:25. And there is nobody in our audience. Is there anybody online?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, also at 7:25. Close the public hearing and open it back up for discussion or a motion from commissioners. Commissioner John.
Well, I think this is going to be a great addition to the city of Burnsville. These are a lot of fun. I've done one of these before, and I would be more than honored to go ahead and make that motion. And I recommend that we recommend the city council the approval of this PUD amendment to allow a lounge in the mixed-use zoning district at 14314 Burnhaven Drive, with the following one condition: that the applicant include odor-reducing equipment as part of the building permit to minimize the food odors emitted outside the building.
Thank you, Commissioner John. There's a motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Timmerman. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Next item on our agenda are updates. Any updates from staff?
So your next meeting is currently scheduled for May 13th. I believe we have between 3 and 5 items scheduled to go before you for that meeting. So we will be having that meeting. So I think that's about it. Is there anything else that you know of?
I guess I would just say we'll probably have the next 2 or 3 meetings with significant agendas. So just come prepared for those. We'll try to get our staff packets
Awesome.
out as early as possible to you.
Awesome. That's why we're here. Excellent. Any updates from commissioners? Seeing none, our last item is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Commissioner Anderson, seconded by Commissioner Hamilton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.